Hello, I'm Karma Kitaj, and I'm your host for A Livelihood, New Adventures as We Age. And today we're going to be talking with Kendall Dudley, who has many life adventures, including one that he's going to be doing in the next few weeks, and we're going to be hearing about that. So, welcome, Kendall.
Well, thank you, Karma. I've loved being here, and it's so nice of you to invite me to come.
When we talked the other day, you said something I thought was interesting, one of many things that was interesting. So this has to do with, I'm not going to remember the phrase exactly, but you said something about how you, even going back to your early years in your 20s when you were in the Peace Corps in Iran, that you realized that there were things that you found out about yourself that were always there but were kind of hidden, right?
That's right.
So maybe you can speak to that a little
Surely.
bit.
Well, when I was in undergraduate school, my mother died. And so I was on a course that I didn't particularly like, but I was in business school, undergraduate business school. And I really wanted to get out of it. But people were suggesting to me, no, just stay it out. It's always good to have a business background, and a business background. Well, then what does a person do who's looking at the world and wants to do some good in the world? Well, they study international relations because the world is chaotic, and if you know something about how the world's put together, you join the UN. So I went to graduate school and I majored in Middle East studies. And then I realized that none of the jobs that were out there for somebody who was newly credentialed interested me, but the Peace Corps interested me. So I went to Iran in a city planning program, but I was full of ideas of what I was looking at. I sort of, with my graduate school training, I knew what I was looking at, and I didn't realize that I had on these glasses that were framing how I saw things. So for the first 6 months, I was very critical of Iranians. I was, looking at the women who were enshrouded in veils, and the hierarchy, the class hierarchy that was very clear. And I enjoyed being there, but it was very complicated because I was bringing so much of myself to it. Then one morning, I was unable to sleep. I went out to my courtyard, and it was just at this moment that's called Soba Safid, when you have a black thread and a white thread, and you just can begin to tell the difference between a black thread and a white thread. And that's when the muezzin calls people to prayer. I heard this for the first time. Now, I'd been in Iran for 6 months. I'd clearly heard it before, but this was the first time I heard it. And
you mean the first time you really listened and took it in?
That's right. And my body, I got a chill down my spine listening to this. And I realized at that point that I had been totally missing the life that was in front of me. So while I was in Iran, what I discovered was all that training that I had was really a training for an idealized self. It was the person who I thought I ought to be, the good person who does good in the world, rather than looking at who I was. And as I looked and listened, I realized that I was much more interested in architecture and the art and the life of the city, and I loved the landscape of Iran. So what I decided to do was to leave that and to enter another area of my interest, which had been writing. And so that began something that through all my travels in Asia, and afterwards, I was writing about all this. So when I realized that I didn't want to actually become an academic, writing was the next thing that was, for me, was very clear. And it was that point that I started teaching journal writing, and somebody in my class said, that journaling that I've been doing has been very helpful for my work. Do you have a private practice? Well, I said yes, just like that, yes, without even thinking about it.
But I guess that you're saying that relationship with your mother really was it kind of engaged you in this process that you're still in now, really.
And that's true.
Listening very acutely and giving people assistance around what's next, how do they want to design their lives, right?
It's true, and I particularly think about what are those impediments to thinking more clearly about our lives, and what are those things that are hidden from us. One of the props I brought is from the Islamic world. It's a little headscarf that your face can show through it, but you can't see much of the back or the shoulders. And I think about ways in which this is a way in which we don't have full access to ourselves. We are the person that, in some ways, others want us to be. When we're going through a point of change in our life, that there are hidden dimensions to our own capacity and our own insight into ourselves. And so what I've tried to do in the workshops that I do and the programs that I run and this travel that we'll speak about is to take people on a journey within themselves about what's the unfinished part of our lives. What are the ways in which our life story is telling us about the things that are yet to be fulfilled? Who is that person in hiding that has perhaps been behind the mask?
And so that's what you do in your journal writing workshops?
I help people take their masks off.
So, Kendall, are there certain questions that you ask people to write about? I suppose you give them little assignments, right?
I do. Well, I ask people to write their life story. And it can happen in a variety of different ways. I teach autobiography for 8 weeks, and people begin to write their autobiography in 8 weeks. But I prefer often to surprise people by their story, by using the Twitter formula for writing your life story, and to write your life story in 35 words. And if you have to do that and you do it several times, you begin to see that there are these key words and phrases and images that come up that are surprising.
So when you give people that assignment to write their life story in 35 words, do you mean just write words?
Like keywords. And some of these words are strange. They surprise people, and that's the part that I find so interesting, is that it's not about this sort of checking in on our habitual knowledge of ourselves. It's finding the fresh version of ourselves. And so I think this is about the life story part, is finding out that we know the facts, but we don't necessarily know what they mean yet. And in this trip that I'm taking to Morocco, I'm taking
which is coming up in March.
At the end of March, 28th of March. We're meeting in Fez, and we're getting in a van, and we're going to go travel down the Atlas Mountains to the desert. We're going to spend a night in the Bedouin tent, and then come up to a beautiful village called Ait Ben Haddou, which
is that, I think we have a photo of that, right?
I think there's a photo of that. And one of the things that is so unusual about it is, for me, it looks like nothing I've ever seen before.
Yeah. I think when I've heard you speak about intentional travel before, I was fascinated with an idea that I think you said at a meeting once, about how when we travel to a different culture, even a different culture within our own country, it just awakens new things in us and helps us to be more creative and to know ourselves better. Right. Well, we are at the end of our time, but we've covered a lot of bases, and you have so many things that are of interest to talk about.
Well, I've certainly delighted to have met with you today, and
Well,
thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming.